Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of you are out there thinking to yourself, boy, it sure would be nice to write a memoir and let people know that I was not only alive, but what my experiences in life were like. Perhaps I could even inspire those who find themselves entangled in particular adversities or obstacles, and they want to see if somebody else has been in their footsteps as well and what to do about it. Or maybe you're also someone who's thinking, as you were inspired watching a movie that was made from a novel that was produced by somebody, I think I'd like to do that as well. But when it comes to writing a book, certainly we know that's quite a bit of work, but even more daunting is getting that particular book project actually out there, in other words, published. This day and age, though, seems to have an allure of promise with technology that tells us we can certainly do this ourselves. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is an author as well as a publisher who can tell you how daunting a project could be. She's spent years as a strategic planner, marketer, and educator, and is usually well-suited to coaching and guiding both authors and potential teams of professionals who are going to be able to help people to be able to do that very thing, which is to publish books. So we're going to discover today how we can focus on strategic book development and marketing so that a book experience is satisfying to you as well as that your books get out there and make a difference. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest with Dudley Court Press, our special guest, Gail Woodard. Gail, thank you for being on the program today.
Well, hello, Daniel. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
You betcha. Now, self-publishing, it's funny because I hear this a lot in circles, especially as people, I talk with them and they think, I'm about to write a book. Can I be on your show? And I say, well, what steps are you taking to actually get your book out there? What's going on? Well, I'm thinking about self-publishing, and usually one of the biggest reasons is they say, to save time and money. After all, why should I spend all that money doing it, And I have to ask, give us an idea of what's in store for people who have that mindset that self-publishing is perhaps the route that they want to take and what self-publishing is.
Oh, my goodness, that's a great question because I hear that all the time, too, that people say, well, I'll self-publish because they think the only other alternative is the traditional publishing route. And they've heard that they don't feel confident that they can get a traditional publishing deal, or they don't want to spend the couple of years or more that it can take to find a literary agent to represent them and then have the book shopped to numerous publishers and get all those rejections and then only get, once they do get a contract in traditional publishing, the publisher essentially takes over the book and the author is paid a small royalty once the books sell. They might get an advance, but advances in the traditional publishing world, they used to be really fat advance checks, but they aren't even for experienced writers. I know writers who had worked with traditional publishers on several books and got very healthy advances until the last few years, last 5-6 years or so, that changed. And even experienced authors who had long-standing relationships were starting to see their advances drop down into 4 digits. And that wasn't enough, to make people happy, but it was reflective of the economics of the time. And so lots of people have figured that they don't want to go the traditional route, and they think the only alternative is to self-publish. And self-publishing what can happen in the world of self-publishing is everything from you taking your book to your local print shop, and having them bind it up in a coil binding, to working with a hybrid publisher who's much more like a traditional publisher, but where the author funds the effort and not the publisher doesn't take the entire financial risk. That whole gamut of everything from the first thing I mentioned to the last is where self-publishing lives today. So I look at it a little differently, not the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing, but rather the difference between amateur publishing and professional publishing. because I think we are so blessed to be living in a time when anyone who wants to have a book in their hands or wants to take the work that they've created, the writing they've created, and get it put into book form. I think we are so blessed to have the opportunity to do that, because 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't. If you were a writer, you either hand-bound your book or you had it bound in coil binding at Kinko's or someplace, and that was the best you could do, unless you paid, in those days, what was called a vanity press, who would take whatever you gave them and print a hardcover book for you, and you had to buy 1,000 or 2,000 copies, and most of them would sit in your garage forever. Those were the only alternatives that we had as writers. If you were a painter, you could always go get your painting put into a beautiful frame, and you could hang it on your window. Writers couldn't put their books on their bookshelves. Today we can. But there's a big difference between doing that as an amateur and then doing it as a professional, or doing it for the commercial marketplace. So that's, I think people need to first think about what their goals are. If you're writing your memoir, you mentioned the joy we can get in writing memoirs today and how important it is to share family memories and things. If it's for your family, then self-publishing is wonderful. It's a great thing to do. So I encourage people to use the tools and technology that are out there and self-publish the kinds of books that would be amateur books or non-commercial books. If you are interested in being a commercial author or have your book out in the world as something, as a professional, then I have some strong opinions about what somebody should do. And it's not generally that they should self-publish on their own.
So, Gail, if a person's, say, they're determined to do this, to publish their own book, what steps do you suggest they follow?
Well, the first one, it really, I'm repeating myself, but it's to clarify what your goals are. Because if you want to self-publish and you're and you don't expect to be out in the commercial marketplace, then you don't really need to do much but write a good book, make sure it gets edited, be happy with the material that you're putting together, and then you can, there are a number of places that will help you publish your book, publish it in the sense of binding it, getting it into paperback form, or if you want to do a hardcover, there are ways to do that. If, however, you are looking at self-publishing your book for professional reasons, then I think we take people through a 7-step process in our company. We call it the successful author system, and that's because every author who goes through it is successful, because we start with the goals, and we're very clear about what the goals are for an author. And I will tell you, and Daniel, I think you and I talked about this before, that a lot of people write a book and think that it's a road to riches, and their expectation is that they're going to finish this book and it's going to get published and they're going to retire to a Caribbean beach and cash royalty checks from their publisher. And so sometimes I have to disabuse people of that expectation, because that doesn't happen. If it ever did, it certainly doesn't happen today. So we really dig deep with people about why they want to publish this book, because writing and publishing a book is a lot of work. And it takes not only the effort to write the book, but it takes a financial investment as well to do it well. So we get very clear on the goals. And then, again, if it's a commercial book, you have before you go very far at all, you have to think about who your audience is. And this is another myth that we have to kind of bust for a lot of people who think that their audience is everybody. Everybody needs to read my book. Everybody's going to want this. And I understand that, because when I wrote my first book, that's exactly where I was. I thought everybody was going to read my book. I thought Oprah was going to love it. I visioned myself on her show. This was in the day she was still on TV. But that's not the case. Everybody does not want your book. So you have to narrow your audience to the people who actually need or will want to read your book. Because in order to reach them, you have to identify them. We also take people through a process of assessing their own competitive position. It's very important for people to know that the commercial book marketplace is very competitive today. There are the numbers on Amazon used to say it was like 23,826,000 books in the English language on Amazon. Now that Amazon's changed its algorithm, now they just say over 20 million books. So I don't know. I know a month ago it was over 23 million. Now it's only over 20 million, but I think they're rounding now. So you need to know how your book compares to the competition and how you compare to other authors who are writing in that genre. So we work people through that, and then you have to understand what your platform is. Now, an author platform is kind of the whole collection of ways that they connect to a marketplace. It could be your website, your email list, your social media followers, and all of that. Any speaking that you do or podcasts, any organizations that you belong to, if you do guest blogging or you have your own blog, any kind of way that you reach people, all of that is considered your platform. If you have none, other than at family gatherings you tell stories, if that's the extent of your platform, it's going to be very difficult to sell very many books. You have to work on your platform, the ways you reach other people.
It's funny because after being in broadcasting for almost 20 years, a predominant amount of the audience the guests that I actually have on the program are people who have created books and they're out there and they're doing tours, and it's a lot of work. It certainly is that. And certainly what I've also experienced is how many people actually publish books. Those things come raining down like an avalanche after a while. So when you talk about the idea that somebody's got this great novel or whatever it may be they think is going to give them that pina colada on the beach for the rest of their lives, I got to tell you, I agree with you. Yeah, and if you're out there listening, don't let it daunt you from writing something. Just don't let that be your goal. There's no doubt about that. And so you can see that that's probably one of the mistakes that they make, is, for instance, that expectation. So why don't you talk about some of the other mistakes that perhaps self-published authors do make as well?
Sure. I will. I think one of the things is that they don't go through these steps that I was just talking about. I've just taken you through only 4 of the 7 steps, so you notice they didn't say anything about writing the book yet.
Right.
And so that is what happens. People, they don't educate themselves about the publishing standards, and they don't, and then they complain because the book doesn't sell. So they don't educate themselves first, and that's really, really important. They spend money on the wrong things. I'm just going to take a little sideline here and say there are companies out there that are called self-publishing services companies. And most self-publishing authors find them because those are the first things that show up when you type in, how do I self-publish my book? They all have ads at the top of the Google search. And there are a number of those companies that are predatory companies. They're going after people who have dreams and who are not educating themselves about what's realistic. They will promise you all kinds of things. They will sell you all kinds of things that you don't need, and it's a transaction for them. I mean, there are stories about how some of these outfits have folks in the Philippines are going to be your project coordinator, and these are folks who are on commission, and their job is to sell you as much as they can. They have no interest in your book. They don't care whether your book is any good. They'll tell you it's wonderful and that you're wonderful, but they can hound you. So it's people will pay money for services that don't deliver anything to them, and I hear that all the time. So I think that's really, really something that's important to understand. There are the 3 other steps in our system. The 5th step is to write the book the right way. And that means a whole lot of things about how to write the right book and have it well written. And then, again, relating to producing your book, our sixth step is to produce your book appropriately. And you can do it as a self-published author, or you can publish traditionally, or you can work with a hybrid publisher. A hybrid is, that's what Dudley Court Press is, and I don't think I explained that, but that's a combination where the author subsidizes, but we're more like a traditional publisher in that we don't take everybody that comes in the door. We have very high standards. We publish particular genres, and we develop relationships with our authors that last a long time. So we're not like the self-publishing services companies or vanity presses. But there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into the publishing part that the mistakes that self-published authors make is they don't understand the importance of doing these things right, but your cover design and the metadata that goes into the systems out there so people can find your book. That's the only time I'm going to mention metadata in this discussion because it drives people crazy, but it's so important. And then the editing and proofreading and the printing quality and understanding the economics, all of that. I see people making those mistakes. And then they don't market. And that's our seventh step is persistent, ongoing, masterful marketing. You can't sell a book without marketing it. So those are some of the mistakes I see people make. There are many other very specific ones that we can come back to that, and I can give you 10 examples of very specific things that they do if you want.
Now, your book, in your new book, Write the Book You're Meant to Write, you have a chapter where you talk about 4 contemporary myths about publishing. What are those?
Yes, we've mentioned a couple of them. That first, the myth is that it's easy to publish and sell a high-quality book today. And you and I both know that it's not, and we want to tell your listeners that it is not easy. It's possible, but it's not easy. The second myth is that anybody can publish a quality book at no or low cost. This is the one that bothers me the most. I think there's so much publicity out there for these self-publishing services companies that people have been trained to believe that they can get a great book at no or low cost, and that is not true. They can get a book at no or low cost, but they can't get a quality book, and a book that is not well conceived and well produced is not going to sell. So yes, you can have a book at no cost, but you will have the book, and you and your family members and friends that you foisted upon will have copies of your book, but the rest of the world will never see your book. The third myth is that a book is a fast, sure road to riches, those pina coladas on the beach, and that's not the case today. Most people will never make money from their book. You have to look at it as an investment. And so that's why part of what we do is look at the bigger picture with authors first and help them understand that this book is going to be something that costs them money. It might be that they earn back the costs over time, but it probably is. It's unlikely for most people. And the people who make money from books are not generally making money from books. They're making money from their speaking business or other aspects to the business that they have around the book. And then the fourth myth is that writing the book is the hard part. Everybody's writing a book and they get to the part where they type THEEND and they think, I'm done. And as you, Daniel, and I both know, that's actually, they should really type the beginning because that's when the hard part starts of marketing the book. And again, nobody sells a book without marketing it.
Now, do you ever recommend self-publishing to people?
Oh, I do. As I mentioned before, and I know you mentioned writing memoirs at the beginning of the book, and I really encourage people to write memoirs. I love when people do that. And for most people, self-publishing a memoir makes loads of sense. In fact, it can be a generational project. You're writing your memoirs. You're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. And if you've got a grandchild who's 12 or 15, and it can be a great project to do together because they know the technology, and it's, kindergartners are doing books these days. The technology is so easy. Any kind of personal project, I've published books of my own daily prayers. Things like I have had them on typewritten sheets, and I've had them hand bound with little ribbons that I put into them. And I decided one day to do it, put those things into a book that I printed on CreateSpace. It's fun to do that, but it's not a book that is commercially viable by any means. I think that fiction authors have a better shot at self-publishing than nonfiction authors because especially if they focus on ebooks. But I still think they need professional help with the covers, and they have to learn how to use metadata to their advantage. So you can't go into it without becoming fairly knowledgeable as a publisher. But you can be successful, especially, again, if you're a fiction author and you have several titles, you're in a good position. If the books are good and you learn how to be a publisher, you have a strong potential for creating a business as a fiction writer on your own. I think also if anybody who really just doesn't have the money to invest in producing a book but wants to understand that if you understand that it's not going to be commercially viable, go for it. It's a creative process. When you upload a book onto CreateSpace, you have over 2 million choices you can make in terms of cover design. When you multiply out how many cover options there are, you can spend days deciding on your cover. It's not going to look like a professionally done book. But, that's like saying to somebody, if you want to paint or sculpt, you can't do it unless it's going to show up in the Museum of Fine Arts. Well, most books are not going to be on bookstore bookshelves, and most, if you put it on Amazon, most of them will never be found and sold. But if you get joy from writing and then seeing your book on your bookshelf, I say go for it. Self-publishing is a great gift that we have today.
Well, and there was something that I wanted to kind of reaffirm or resurface about what you said earlier about why you publish a book is usually it's something that a person who might go out on, let's say, guest lecture tour, if you will, promoting their work, it's something they're able to leave behind for people. So it becomes more like a reminder card, if you will. And it also opens up a lot of doors because once you publish a book or you have a book in hand, then you sort of become an expert, for instance, in a particular area. It could be health and nutrition, for instance. I mean, we're infested with these things. Everybody seems to have an idea about, what's best for our health, and all of a sudden, they're the next big hit. So if you were using it for that particular reason, you can see where it's viable. You could be somebody who's publishing on YouTube. I see a lot of this actually going on where, here's some steps to success on making money on YouTube. And by the way, if you subscribe, then I'll go ahead and I'll send you a free copy of my book on how you can do that. So, these are ways that you look at why you would actually publish a book in the first place. And now, I'm kind of curious, you obviously recommend different paths for different kinds of authors, don't you?
Well, I do. And, maybe I've covered some of that, but the first place everybody should start, every author needs to start, is to decide whether they're going to do this as an amateur or a professional. Because then amateurs just, read up about self-publishing and go onto CreateSpace or Blurb or Lulu.com or any of those places and just do your book. They're all very simple. You don't have to be an expert to follow the instructions. You will end up with an amateur book, and that's fine. But if you're professional, and I think you just alluded to a very important phenomenon, because it's so easy to publish, Everybody's publishing a book, and anybody who is in a business of any kind, any entrepreneur, coaches, all kinds of folks are being told, write your lead generation book. And that's a very valuable thing for people to do because, Daniel, you're right. A book establishes a level of expertise around you. You become a celebrity. You become a known figure. You know, you're not the big time celebrities, but people are impressed with people who write books and publish books. And if you've got a business, then writing a lead generation book can be very, very helpful. Again, you need to do it right. I find people a lot of times are being encouraged by their business coaches, for example, to write a lead generation book. And so they write something, and maybe it's a 40 to 60 page book. And for some people, that is great because I have a friend who is a speech therapist, and she's put together a book that basically says, I forget the exact title, but it's something like, your child needs a speech therapist. What do you do now? And it's really the answers to the first 10 questions that a parent who's been told their child needs a speech therapist needs to know. But in providing that introductory information, she's marketing her business. I have a friend who helps people get on TED Talk stages, TEDx stages, and her book is 18 Minutes of Impact, and it's how to get on the TED Talk stage. Again, it's introductory information that somebody needs to know. I have a little book called Steps to Publishing a Book. I give it out because it covers the fundamentals, that someone who wants to step down this path really needs to know. Those are great, and they're basically marketing brochures, but they're books. However, for some people, I know some people that whose business takes place, say, at corporate executive levels, in the boardroom. They can't go in with a flimsy 40-page, 50-page paperback book. In order to make their mark and to be seen as an expert at their level, in their field, they need a 200-page hardcover book. So you need to understand where you are and what your goal is in order to get the right book done. There isn't a single answer for everyone.
And I can imagine when it comes to giving tips for people who are writers that there must be a difference between the tips that you give for a fictional writer as well and one to a non-fictional writer. Give us an example of a couple of those.
Yeah. They're very different worlds. And I think that one thing I would say to everybody is if you're out there and you're listening to advice or reading advice about writing and publishing, the first thing to understand is which category are you in, fiction or nonfiction, because they are so different. And advice for fiction writers, I think, is very much different. So one thing I tell fiction writers is, first of all, your writing has to be good. Crappy writing is not going to get you very far. So you have to hone your writing craft. Second is that you have to commit to solid editing practices. You cannot go forward thinking that your work doesn't need to be edited, or that your friend who majored in English is going to be your editor. Book editors are a particular breed. They've been trained to address a whole lot of quality issues, and it's not just about grammar. There's issues about character development and pace and all sorts of things within the fiction writing world that a good book editor is going to help you with. Then the other things that have to do with economics, and my contention is, I'm not sure I've seen this in other places, but I think any fiction writer who wants to be successful as a fiction writer, wants to make a bit of a career of it, whether it's a full-time career or a part-time career, you really need to have your second book ready before you release your first book. And you need to have a third and fourth book in mind, outlined, kind of coming together. I think the worst thing a fiction writer can do is get that first book written and go to market with it and spend time and money and energy trying to build a readership base with one book. Because, Daniel, when you read a fiction book of a novel or short novel or whatever kind of fiction you read, when you finish reading it, if you've liked that book, what's the first thing that you do?
Well, you obviously want to read the next one, yeah.
By that author, right? Yeah, we all do that. And so if you're an author and you only have one book for me, you have spent all that time and you've invested so much in finding the reader, and then you have no second sale to make to them. It's foolish. You're much better off instead of spending those 2 years building your readership base and to sell that one book, you're better off getting your second book out there and then building the readership base. I mean, you want to start marketing at the beginning, of course, and there's all kinds of ways to build a readership base even before you get your first book out. But I think as you type the end of the first book, if you're serious about being making a business of writing, then you have to get your second book. A third book is even better because you amortize the cost. Every reader you get is going to buy 3 of your books or 2 of your books if you've got those out there. But if you only have one, they read the one, they don't find another one, and they move on to another author. And you have to find them all over again when your second book is done. So that is really important in my view. The other thing is to learn the business, learn the publishing business. Fiction authors, as I mentioned before, can do a lot with ebooks, and if they learn the economics of publishing today, and here's an example. The sweet spot for fiction is in the 350-page range, and the price is $15.95 or so. That's where you see lots of books. Well, as a self-publishing author, and even working with hybrid publisher like us, unless you already have a readership, which guarantees that you're going to sell a print run of 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 copies, your best bet is going to be print on demand, which is a technology that lets us print one book at a time. It's more expensive to print one book at a time than it is to print 5,000 at a time, but in terms of the unit cost. But unless you know you're going to sell the 5,000, you will spend less money printing as POD or print on demand. But if you print on demand a 350-page book, it'll cost so much that there'll be no money left for you for profit because the unit cost just gets so high. You can't sell your book at $20. You'd have to price it at the $15 or $16 price point. So it's better to, in my opinion, it's better to sell a 180-page book for $15. So split your book into 2 books. If you've got a 350-page novel, add a little more, split it in 2, and sell them for $14.95, because a 200-page book is more economical to print as POD. I hope that I'm not confusing people out there, but these are fundamental economics in the self-publishing world today. And if you don't understand them and you don't think about these basic numbers, how much does it cost to print your book, and how much can you sell it for, and what does it cost you what do you get if you put it on Amazon? How much of that retail price do you get back? You have to look at those numbers. And one way to make it economical is actually to print fewer pages, POD, but sufficient number that you can charge, enough money to make a little money. But again, if you have 2 books and you're selling 2 books at $15 each, that's $30 that readers are paying for, let's say, the 400 pages, instead of a 400-page book at, say, $16. And people will buy those books if they like you. And if you've got 2 or 3, in your series or under your name, you're going to sell more of those books, and you just do a better job. And then the final thing for fiction authors is consistent, ongoing marketing. You just have to be out there all the time marketing your books.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And and again, it takes work. You can't just put it out there and think, oh, okay, everybody's going to find me and let the money roll in. It's kind of funny how that thinking is.
No.
Now,
we all think that at the beginning.
I'm just, lastly here, as we're about to wrap up, I was going to ask you now, if someone wanted to work with the company that you're involved with here, would you rather see them publish their book first on their own, or should they come to you with the idea? I mean, how does that process work?
Well, working with Dudley Court Press, I'd like to see them as early in the process as possible. And that's because I have seen too many people who write their book without guidance, and they come to me with their manuscript, and then when we talk about what their goals are and what they're trying to accomplish, it's clear to me that they've written the wrong book. And that could have been avoided by having the discussions early on and getting squared away with the direction that they were going and becoming educated about what they need to understand so that they accomplish their real goals with a book that's actually going to serve them.
Exactly.
So early on is great for me.
You got it. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you back here on the program again. And how can people find out more about your work and, those necessary steps? Because what I hear clearly that people should understand, especially if they've never published a book before, is, be careful about your expectations. Know what it is exactly, as you were saying, your goals are, why you're actually writing a book in the first place. And certainly there's a lot of what you call predatory companies out there. I mean, look, at any industry that has to do with what we could call a hint of vanity has predators out there, believe me. And I've been out there, and it's funny, what they'll tell you, because the first thing where an alarm comes up, I've been in this industry X amount, this is the way it's done, and believe me, you do this and this is going to happen for you. Nobody can guarantee anything, except that they'll get your money. They can guarantee they'll get that.
Right.
Now,
right.
But how can people find out more about your work, where they can find you, things like that?
Sure. Well, our website, I invite everybody to come and take a look, is dudleycourtpress.com. And if they want to go directly to getting in touch with me, they can go to dudleycourtpress.com/get started. Get started will take them to a way to connect with me. And I start every relationship with a conversation. I have you fill out a little survey that answers questions so that I can help you effectively. But then we set up a absolutely free, no obligation, half-hour call to talk about your book project. And then from there, I suggest resources to help you achieve your goals. It might be working with Dudley Court Press, or it might be doing something else.
Right.
But, yeah.
And I think it's important, too, if I may draw an analogy, for instance. Let's take a look at, you want to travel, let's say, to Costa Rica, okay, and you have this big idea about how you'd like this vacation to go. Now, you can certainly go online and you can do all the planning, and you'll certainly try to find ways that you can cut corners and save money and so forth. But I guarantee you, in the end, when you do this, you're not going to have what you thought you were going to have for vacation, even if you have saved a little bit of money. But thinking of all the money that you actually would have spent in your time, for instance, versus going to a travel agent that has all these connections and you say, this is the experience I want. That may seem expensive right off the bat, but when you realize the ease of achieving what it was that you wanted to achieve during this, you can see the same thing here in the publishing world when it comes to a book. Look, if I was going to say anything, spend the money. Believe me, being a host, I see it a lot, and it's amazing. You can almost feel and tell within the first 30 seconds whether, really, I'm going to have to actually talk to this person? Seriously?
Yeah.
It's amazing what you see out there. So.
Well, I also liken it to America's Got Talent. People write a book, and they think because they put 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 words on paper, they have a book that everybody's going to love. That's like saying I took, a year's worth of tap dancing lessons, and I should be on the live show of America's Got Talent. I should be. And when you think of how many people, out of all the thousands and thousands of people who try out for America's Got Talent, how many are in the top 10?
Right.
Oh, that was a trick question. I know. But it's, how many people get to the Olympic gold level? There are thousands and millions of athletes out there who will never get to the Olympic podium. And that's the same thing with authors. There are millions who either, I'm not going to say they don't have the talent, because talent is definitely a piece of it, but it is mastery of their craft. And then it's the coaching.
Right.
The athlete, no athlete ever made it to an Olympic game without a lot of coaching.
Absolutely.
And so there's the coaching, there's the support, there's the technical knowledge, there's all of those things that support an athlete. Well, authors, to be successful in reaching their goals, authors need to have that same kind of support.
And lastly, I'm reminded of actor Edward James Olmos, who most people might remember from the movie Stand and Deliver. And I caught him on a talk show one time, and he said something that I thought was very profound, and you're certainly saying the same thing, too, in a different way. But he says, if you truly want to get in this business and you want to be an actor, maybe it could be entertaining in general, but he was specifically talking about acting. He says, have a passion for it, obviously, but he says, you will be successful. It could take 5 years, it could take 10 years, it could take 50 years, but you will be successful. But he says, if you come in this industry with the idea of becoming rich and famous, I suggest you go do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing for authors.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is not a place to get rich and famous. Yeah. If you cover your costs, consider yourself lucky. Mm-hmm. But have fun, have the passion for it. Enjoy the creative process, because that's what life's about.
Mm-hmm. And you never know. You may be struck by lightning, but that's exactly what it is. You're struck by lightning.
Yeah.
Gail, thank you so much for being on the program today. It's been a pleasure.
Great to talk with you, Daniel. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. Again, that website for Gail that she was talking about is www.dudleycourtpress.com. That's dudleycourtpress.com. And that can be one of your first steps toward going in the direction of creating your own book for the world to experience. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter so that you can stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. Again, thanks for joining us, and remember, live your day past halfway.